Welcome to this election night special.
The stakes couldn't be higher. The day couldn't be longer. I don't know. That's probably not right. But.
Probably not right. We're on an off-year election.
Yep.
And that brings us to some big races.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of races to go around the horn and look at. We've got some that have already been called, and can't wait to get you guys caught up if you haven't been following along so far tonight.
The reason why these are big races, though, is because it's in years like this that it sets the precedent for what to expect in the actual midterm elections.
Yep.
The one that everybody's watching is this mayor race that's happening in New York City.
And polls have just closed in New York City about 4 minutes ago.
So we will be tracking the early results on that. You mentioned some races have already been called. There's been a lot of activity going on in Virginia and the mayor race that you were so closely following over there in Cincinnati.
Of course, yeah. Fun fact, if you didn't know before tonight, J.D. Vance's half-brother was running for the mayor of Cincinnati against the incumbent. It looks like he's going to lose. That race has already been called by numerous places. Fox, the AP, CNN, among others, of course. Then the important ones I think that we should get out of the way really fast here are the Virginia governor and lieutenant governor races. Virginia governor, they've both been called for the Democrat. Abigail Spanberger is going to be the next governor of Virginia. She is already, I believe, even having her big hoopla, acceptance or celebration speech. There we go, words.
In some ways, this is an upset. It's really not, because this was a close race the whole way, but you had Republican governor already in place. And then you had a really weird... I don't know how far we'll go into this. It'll be really interesting. We're going to have special guest Jared Hendrix on. He's going to be joining us here soon.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about all these races with him, and also talk about some North Dakota politics, because North Dakota politics season is heating up and we need to put him on the hot seat.
Of course.
But, you hear this thing of DEI, and this was an interesting thing. There's a clip of Obama at a Pennsylvania group where President Obama is talking about how you, as a black man, you can understand how you wouldn't vote for someone of that same color.
Sure.
Right? You need to vote for Kamala Harris. And that was the message. And then here he was campaigning for it. And it's just an interesting time of how this plays into this race. But I don't know that it's substantial or not, but it was definitely interesting thing. Just a sub story.
Just one
how
of many
really
this
what this comes down to is just politics.
Yeah, so much. And I think one thing you're seeing that's just been growing over the last decade plus of American politics is people are voting so much more for the party than the person.
That's what it comes down to, and that's kind of the point of what it's happening. Is that point of what I was trying to say is wherever you fall on the spectrum, I hear it, and those things do matter to some of the votes. But at the end of the day, it's the values, that's what matters, and the party, that's what matters. And so we saw that happen over there in Virginia.
Yep. One interesting fact, regardless of the victor, it was going to be the first female governor of the state of Virginia. So that is one milestone that Virginia has ticked off. I think they also have, if I'm not mistaken...
That's neat. That's huge.
The most governors in this United States history. They're on now their 75th governor.
Well, that's because of their weird process, dude.
Yeah.
Every 4 years, they're voting in a new governor. Then you mentioned you have to sit 4 years, and then you can run again. Like, as far as term limits go, that stinks.
These people are either done with their career at that point, or they're on to something else.
Yeah, there's no way you can just sit on the sidelines for 4 years. Yeah, that's incredible. That's something that, from an outsider perspective, that should change.
Yeah, that is the only state that has it like that. A lot of other states have it where it's a 2-year term limit, and then you have to take a 4-year gap and come back. There's a handful of states like that.
I can understand that. We'll talk with the former Virginian about this. Jared Hendrix.
I'm ready.
When he's here.
Oh, I thought he was here. He'll be able to give us a lot more depth and detail on some of that coming from Virginia then. Another one that we are tracking to is the Virginia lieutenant governor race. That has also been called in favor of Democrat Hashmi. And then another one that is very close that we're following is the Virginia attorney general race. And that is the tightest race in Virginia of major races, especially polling wise, coming up to this evening. However, right now with about 75% of the vote in. The Democrat Jay Jones is beating the Republican Jason Miyares by about 1.5 points, or about maybe 2 points now.
Which is another very interesting race. Jay Jones was one that had some questionable things happen that came to light during his campaign, and it does not seem to have had any major effect on it, as he still is leading, and he's been pretty much projected to lead the whole way.
Yeah, it's a lot closer than a couple of those other races in Virginia,
right.
But he's up by about 70,000 votes, and no one's called it yet. At least none of the major markets have called it yet, but it's looking like it's probably getting to the point where it's not too far away.
Something that you should pay attention to is your attorney general seat, because that there's a ton of influence that happens in that position.
Yep.
Way more than what you might suspect. And so that's actually a big race. North Dakota this is one that they vote on as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that definitely should pay attention to.
Yep. North Dakota's is going to be coming up next year, 2026. Ours will be on the ballot along with a lot of our other high state level officials outside of the governorship.
Drew Wrigley going to run again?
Yeah. I bet he's probably announced it in some corner somewhere.
I don't know if he has or not, but somebody has.
Who has?
Announced that they're going to run for their
second term,
Sean Cleary.
Hey, he's down in Bismarck, right?
Down in Bismarck.
That's exciting.
He was part of the campaign for Julie Fedorchak.
Sure. Yep. We are in first week of November, and we're already getting campaign announcements for next year.
When are you announcing your run for state senate?
I'm not in District 3. Well, I lied. I am in District 3. Not this year. I'll say that.
Not this year. So maybe down the road we'll have a run from Kyler Collom.
I was going to say, I'm not in any of the districts.
That worked last year.
Yeah,
last time.
Yeah, not this time. I cannot say that. What about you, Jonathan? Well, you're not in District 5. Yep.
I am in an even numbered district.
Yep.
Yep. And next election cycle, I might move to an odd number one.
One other close election that we've been following, meaningful election that we've been following, is the New Jersey governorship.
Yep.
It's been held by Phil Murphy since Chris Christie left office, who was the last Republican to hold that office. This was a race that in the polls was projected to be very close. Right now, we're sitting with about 52% of the vote in, and one thing to be mindful of in New Jersey, they count all of their mail-in ballots early. So when they come in, especially from New Jersey, it's very heavily incentivized towards the Democrats, but with about 52% of the vote in, as of right now, we have the Democrat Mickey Sherrill up on Jack Citarelli by roughly 13 points, or about a vote total difference of 260,000.
Well, hopefully they can find the votes for that.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tough one.
What does it mean when they say, "We'll see if we can find the votes"? There was an interview done recently by a politician that lost on a major stage that said that they got a phone call from people in their campaign that said, "Yeah, we're down this meeting. We don't think we can find the votes."
Are the polls still open at that point in time?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go off with the assumption that that they're getting this information maybe 2 hours before, and they're going to go try to do the best get out the vote campaign with 2 hours to go that they can.
No, that's not when this is happening. You don't get out of that cushion that easy.
Well,
what does it mean?
In that case, one of two.
California's polls might have still been open.
Yeah, California's polls are open. They're open till 9 p.m. our time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying,
right? No, they're open till
in the story that I was telling,
1 a.m. our time.
In the story that I was telling, California's polls may have still been open.
Sorry. Yes, that's fair.
But
those go for a long time.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
And that's the thing. So in some certain states where you can conceivably, like the state of New Jersey I was reading earlier, mail-in ballots can be counted until the 10th of November. So almost a full week past the election date. So, I mean, hypothetically, you can always hope that you can get some of those people that didn't vote the day of to maybe get that last second ballot in the mail to maybe get you over the hump there.
Right. So, that being said, Zohran Mamdani is leading in New York as the polls close.
Yep. The first numbers coming out of New York does have Zohran Mamdani up right now. But looking ahead, it's going to be a close one there. I think that's going to be closer than people have said, and it's polled recently. I think last night's decision by President Trump to endorse Cuomo isn't going to change anything. I still think Mamdani wins, but I don't think it's going to be a 10, 15 point blowout. As of right now, he is up over Cuomo by about 100,000 votes, give or take a little bit. It's 51.2 to 40%, with Curtis Silva sitting in third at about 8% right now.
We have a question. Are the people that still standing in lines, can they still vote?
Generally speaking, I believe so. If you are in line by the time polls close, most of the time you're going to be allowed to vote.
They put a marker or something behind the person?
At the time of poll close. So if you get here after 8 p.m., say polls close, you're unfortunately not going to be able to vote. But if you're in line by that point in time, they're going to let you in.
Generally speaking.
Yeah. Maybe there's going to be some specific instances against that, but generally, yes.
So in New York City, they have the most convoluted ballot ever. Maybe not ever. I haven't seen every ballot ever. But it is very weird. If we can, we're going to grab a picture of it and get it up on screen for you. This is just something that is pulled off the social media of the world. But yeah.
Some images that were floating around. One thing that I noticed just initially, surface level, they have vertical ballots compared to ours being horizontal. Or excuse me, vice versa. They have horizontal compared to ours being vertical. And not necessarily anything wrong with that, but makes for a bit of an interesting and cobbled look a little bit.
Yes.
Another one that they have on there that was interesting is candidates can get on the ballot by multiple endorsing parties. So Mamdani was on there 2 times, and Eric Adams was still on there despite dropping out.
Very good. We actually have a guest that is joining us right now via the phone. If it works. Well, it did. There he is. Representative from District 10, Jared Hendrix. How are we?
Hello. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. Should be fun.
It should be.
Great. Thanks for coming on, Jared.
Before we jump into the politics of everything, and there may be stuff that you want to say out of the gate, but before we jump into the politics of everything, there's something that happened recently in Jamaica that is pretty devastating. That maybe, I know that you have some ties or close connections there. Maybe if you could talk about that for a second, and if there's any way that can support what's going on there.
Oh, yeah, sure. I appreciate that. So my fiance is from Jamaica, and as everybody has seen the news, they were hit directly last week by a Category 5 hurricane, the strongest that's ever made landfall on record in that island. The strongest, certainly the last time there was a significant one was 1988, but I mean, this is the biggest one on record. I mean, 200 plus miles per hour winds. I mean, the devastation is just significant and a little bit underreported too, because a lot of the areas that you would, get news out of, you're not getting that news because of isolation and infrastructure that's broken down. Most of the news might come out of Kingston and areas that were not hit as hard. So we have connections on the ground that are bringing around people food and supplies. And so on my own personal Facebook page and my campaign Facebook page, which you should be able to find pretty easily, or maybe you could link it in the group chat. Yep. But we are collecting donations to go down there. We set a goal to raise $3,000, and we're, I think, around 2,000. So we're getting there. So it's not a huge amount, but there's a lot of good causes to support. People support the Good Samaritan and Red Cross and these groups, but the problem is a lot of these groups are not even really getting direct access to some of these areas yet. And we have a much more direct access. So, but yeah, I appreciate you asking that. It's a real tragedy.
Yeah, horrible situation going on down in Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean down there. So fantastic situation. You've been able to help promote that going on here. Jonathan, I know, is working on getting that posted in the comments right now. But Jared, any other starting words before we dive into some politics here?
No, let's dive right in.
All right. Obviously, a couple ones that we already mentioned here. Virginia governor, lieutenant governor race have been called. Those ones were a couple, more notable races down there that people kind of saw them going the way they did and maybe didn't think it was going to be called this soon, but it looks like that's the way they're going.
Yeah. And I can, now that results are coming in,
mm-hmm.
don't have the benefit of looking good when I say this, but had I predicted it, I would have said that I think that the Democrats will narrowly win the governor's race. And, Virginia really is at this point, a +2 to +5 Democrat state at this point. It's a very light blue, purple, if you want to call it that. And for those who don't know, I'm actually from Virginia originally. I grew up there. I was there for 30 years before I moved to North Dakota. So I'm very familiar with the politics there and some of the individuals. And also, I will make the point too that one of the things you learn on campaigns and being sort of a political nerd, I'm sure you guys are like this too, but you learn to try to give as objectively as you can analysis on what's going on. I can give my opinion separately on who I would vote for and why. We can talk about that if you want to, but just objectively, I try to look at the polling and the data. And while the polls were definitely narrowing, and Republicans do tend to outperform polls in Virginia consistently, they have the last several cycles, and we saw that actually 4 years ago when Glenn Youngkin won, although he also was leading in a few of the polls. But we just saw extensive turnout in a lot of the rural areas, which are still very much Republican and very red. But it looks like that just didn't quite materialize, at least yet so far tonight. Again, we don't have all the numbers from all the counties. The lieutenant governor's race was looking a lot closer based upon the polls. And of course, the attorney general's race was and is the closest with the results. And that's why they haven't called it yet tonight. As everybody knows, unless you've been living under a rock, there was a lot of news coverage around the AG's race because the Democrat was caught, with some text messages where he was defending, let's just say, murdering political opponents, including their children. Pretty horrific stuff. And that actually makes it pretty startling to think tonight that he might still win. I don't know what that says about our process or our voters. I don't know, but it's not a good thing in my opinion. But in any event, it is a very fundamentally blue-leaning state. So for that reason, it's not terribly surprising. But again, the votes are not all in, and I think it's definitely possible that the Republican AG candidate squeaks out a victory.
So about that for a minute, though, before you jumped on, we talked about kind of the impact of what these races are. We're going to see winners and losers tonight, and we'll talk about those. But also, it's kind of like testing the wind to see where it's blowing as it heads into the actual midterms coming next year. And when you look in Virginia and you see the things that are happening there, do you find that concerning at all? You have this attorney general race where there were some very graphic text messages that were shown of words that were said that are just crazy and difficult to believe. You have the Republican, the lieutenant governor, who is going to lose that race, that governor's race. What as you look at the picture going into the midterms, what do you feel like this tells us?
Well, I think that it's actually maybe a little problematic to try to draw a lot of broad conclusions from it. That's not to say you can't draw any conclusions from it, but I would caution anyone from saying that this, guarantees some sort of result next year in the midterms. Especially in the case of Virginia, as it's been kind of a pattern in recent years where Virginia, being on the off cycle, tends to vote against the party in power in the White House. And that has been true in the last several cycles. Not every time, but it has been a lot recently in recent decades. There's also a very large number of federal workers in Virginia, especially in Northern Virginia, but also even where I grew up in the Norfolk, Hampton area, which is some of the highest, if not the highest per capita military population in the United States. And so there's obviously a lot of discussion being driven around the government shutdown. And I think that, unless that is continuing a year from now, which I don't think will be the case, I don't know that will weigh in the same way in the midterms as it is here. But again, also keep in mind that Virginia has shifted really to being pretty light blue. So a lot of the issues, like, for example, on abortion rights, that was a dividing line in the governor's race. There's also, issues on education freedom and things like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues that I think just fundamentally leaned in favor of the Democrats in this state in this snapshot, and I don't think that is necessarily translatable to next year's midterms.
That's fair. One real fast interjection. It looks like Fox is calling the New Jersey governor race in favor of Mickey Sherrill. I haven't
Yeah,
seen the AP. AP just called it as well. So
There you go.
that one looks like they're probably wrapping up. But the
yeah,
Virginia,
not
go
a
ahead.
big surprise there too. I mean, Chitterelli, if I'm saying it right, tried a few times initially and I
Yeah,
got it wrong, but you know, he did fairly well when he ran a few years ago, and he did well this time. And Republicans are closing the gap a little bit in New Jersey in recent years. Even if you look at the difference between Biden and Kamala from 2020 2024, and I think that that trend will continue. And again, it wasn't that long ago that Republican Chris Christie was able to
yep,
win, and I think that a certain type of Republican can still win in New Jersey. It's not going to be maybe a Wyoming or a South Dakota type Republican, but it will be, a Republican that can appeal over there. And that's the same thing we see even in the mayoral race in New York. I know you guys were touching on that a little bit.
hmm
Curtis Sliwa is the Republican. I would say you could maybe argue is fairly conservative by New York standards in a
Right.
mayoral race, but probably not by, let's say, North Dakota standards, right? So it's
yep,
all relative in a way. But again, I think that even though he looks like they're calling it against the Republican in New Jersey, I think that the shift still in the last two cycles at least has been that Republicans have made some interesting gains. I think if they get the right candidate, I think New Jersey is definitely still fundamentally a purple state in a lot of ways.
yeah. And you go back 25, 30 years. New Jersey was a pretty firmly swing state at that point in the end of the first Bush era, throughout the Clinton era, really until probably about 20 years ago. You had Christine Todd Whitman as governor there for a long time, almost won a Senate seat, and it's a state that has a history of being a red state.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
And again, sometimes it plays out differently as it affects state issues versus federal issues.
Sure.
And you see that where somebody like Chris Christie, who's sort of the prosecutor vibe and that tough on crime shtick, which is still popular sentiment, even in a state that maybe leans blue a little bit. And we see how this plays out in other states. This might seem like a weird comparison, but look at West Virginia. Traditionally a very working class, blue collar, union Democrat state, and elected federal office holders really just until really the passage of Obamacare and the sort of the Obama war on coal, as they call it. And that really is what shifted the state from being fairly blue to being solid red now. Um, and Kentucky's another interesting state.
Yeah.
Kentucky votes very red for its federal offices still. You have, U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul winning by pretty, sizable margins. Yet you have a Democrat governor, and you have a lot of the
Right.
state legislature elects Democrats. And again, you have a lot of these. I have family from Kentucky. You have a lot of these sort of Democrat, coal miner union towns, and so it's an interesting dynamic. Things aren't always as much as we might want to simplify it, as red or blue. Sometimes there's a lot of mixture even between the federal and state.
Hear you there. One thing in this Virginia race is that obviously term limits is what causes the outgoing governor, Glenn Youngkin, to have to depart that seat. Maybe he'll come back in a couple years, 4 years. But question for you is, in North Dakota, we're going to start running into this, and obviously the legislators down in Bismarck, they went and got this back on the ballot for the people to vote on. As we begin to see the effects of this, do you think it's going to have an effect that, I understand that it's not quite the same comparison, but are seats going to flip between parties as term limits comes into effect in North Dakota, do you think?
I don't, well, let me frame my point. Assuming the sort of national trends and the overall electorate doesn't change very significantly, I would say that probably not very much, but could it in certain districts that are very close, very purple, where you have an incumbent leave office, and they obviously take all those advantages and name ID with them. Yes, that's definitely possible. There are a very diminishing small number of districts that are truly purple swing districts, notably Grand Forks, Fargo. Obviously, my district is very much a purple district. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Kamala Harris won my district.
Oh,
I got more
wow.
votes than Trump, but
There
that
you
is
go.
definitely not, the norm. So I would
Yeah.
say overall, probably not, unless something crazy happens at the federal level or something happens significantly changing our energy industry and things like that.
Sure.
But yes, in certain districts, it will have an effect.
Gotcha. So as we look at the North Dakota landscape of politics, you guys came out of Bismarck. Something that I've been asking legislators. We'll take a break from the national stuff. We'll keep tracking it as more results come in. But something that we've been asking some of the state legislators are, you get to see your work actually become law and get to see the effects of it. As you've seen the effects of what happened in this past session, what are some of the things that you're still proud of or happy that you're able to get through, and you can actually see the positive effect that you're hoping for?
Yeah, it's a good question. Tough question. So, I think that, well, for one thing, I'll start with property tax. Property tax was kind of a frustrating experience because I did vote for the relief bill, and I am glad to see that people will be getting some relief. But I didn't particularly like the 3% cap that was in it. I didn't particularly like the overall approach, which I sort of saw as kicking the can down the road a little bit. I mean, the long-term vision is to ultimately use legacy fund earnings to offset the property tax burden. And I just generally don't like the idea of having a plan that's based on the future promises of future politicians.
Right.
I don't really like that approach. I think it'd be better to put in place real structural reform. In other words, changing the valuation process, or obviously, there is the property tax measure, which gets rid of property taxes. And I think, you have everything from that to some level of reform, everything in between. But I think any kind of real reform is going to cause some degree of disruption and pain. And I think that's why there's not a lot of strong leadership pushing for that, because it's a lot easier to just kick the can down the road.
Right.
Um, but it is, I guess, I don't know if that's answering your question, but yeah, maybe it is
Property
good to
tax.
see the relief come. But it is frustrating that, we're going to have, I think, to come back and deal with this over probably the next few sessions, depending upon what comes out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
One thing that will, one real quick, I should say,
You're good.
one thing that would be interesting too is I'm looking at seeing what the results will be of the one lone school choice bill that we did get passed, which is the charter schools, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be very interested to see what kind of outcomes we get from that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Sitting on property tax a little bit longer. Definitely relief, not reform. The 3% cap, we've seen that locally have a huge impact. In my opinion, in our county, it had a very large impact. In our city budget, it had in my opinion, a very minimal impact. And I don't know every budget throughout the state, but I know that going forward, eventually, it may not be this next session or next year, but it may be the year after that. In 2 to 4 years, this 3% cap is going to start. Every budget's going to start feeling it, because eventually it forces you to cut every year. Because of how low it is, it forces you to cut every year. Do you think, from your point of view, that the 3% cap is something that is maintainable, or is this something that is going to have to go away or get increased?
That's a good question. I don't pretend expertise on this subject, but I will say that I think it's going to be uneven. I think some local subs will be affected very much differently, because of how fiscally disciplined they are, and of
Right.
course the circumstances of each of those communities, which, as we saw during the oil boom, for example, varied quite widely, or
Right.
even outside of the oil boom. I mean, look at the growth of certain communities, like near Fargo, we have the growth of Horace, and even West Fargo, and of course Fargo itself, but there's a lot of variation there. So I think it's going to be very disproportionate in the outcomes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I think that's pretty fair, especially for what we've seen so far locally here in Minot, especially. Like Jonathan was saying, the city they've talked about it and it's been discussed a lot, but generally overall it hasn't affected them too much on the whole budget process itself. Where on the flip side, the Ward County itself, who maybe along the lines has done a pretty fair job of being tight with their budgets, now this year they've forced to have to, or maybe not this year, but into next year and the year after, they're going to be forced into making some cuts that they're going to be questioning if they really should be, or if they should have to actually cut those or not.
Yeah, you're going to be looking at either people or services.
Yep.
So, very, very interesting. I'm being told that there's a bill that I should ask you about. So I'm going to ask you about it. I don't know much about it. So you're going to have to fill in the gap here for me. But evidently there's a robo-cop bill, and you may know more about this. Can you break it down or give a little bit of background on it?
Yeah, so I put in, along with some co-sponsors, HB 1613. Can't always remember all the bill numbers, but that was initially I branded it as sort of the anti-RoboCop bill. We were facing quite a time crunch there, and I didn't get the bill drafted quite the way I wanted it. So if you end up looking at the final version, is just completely a different bill, and I'm very happy with it. Actually, sometimes I'm not happy with the way a bill might get changed, but in that case, it was deliberate. But basically, in essence, it is a bill to prohibit the lethal use autonomously of any law enforcement robot or drone. There was some language already in code related to drones specifically, but we wanted to expand that to include robots more broadly. So it's been kind of jokingly, or maybe not so jokingly, referred to as the RoboCop bill. We were able to work with the North Dakota law enforcement community, as well as Senator Castaneda, and Minot was a big help up in your guys' territory. And so, we were able to get a very good product out of it. My understanding is it's actually being looked at as and talked about as sort of model legislation, even within the Governors Association nationally. I think it was very pioneering. I don't think there was any other bill that I could find across the country that had a very specific and new definition of what a robot is. But it sounds kind of like Terminator science fiction stuff, but I mean, this is the world we're living in right now. This is actually already happening in China. They have police robots already out there doing patrols. They have them in Dubai. And in fact, the ones in China are actually they look sort of like imagine if you've seen the Star Wars movies like BB-8. It's just like basically like a giant wheel that rolls around and has all kinds of equipment on it. It's about 500 pounds. Probably could run somebody to this, but yeah, we are living in this era, and I think that whenever you have a decision by law enforcement, which has to happen sometimes to use lethal force, obviously there's situations where it happens, but in my opinion, there should always be a human being initiating and making that decision. We should never let that be at the behest of AI technology. It's a human life, and it should be a human making that decision.
No, that's good and very neat. So fair. It's a pioneering bill there. When you go and you look at bills, this is something that we've asked around. Do you look at bills as far as being reactive to situations that are going out, or do you look at it as being proactive? Obviously, the easy out is, I look for a balance between the two, and I get that there's a time where you should be proactive and there should be a time that you're reactive, but kind of like tell us where that comes in. When should we be proactive with a bill, putting in a law that may not actually be a problem yet, and when should we be reactive when we're actually, hey, this is a problem, we actually do need to get some legislation to fix it?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a very good question, and there is no singular answer. It really depends on the issue. I think in general, I would say that one of the good things that we have today is just the convenience of communication and technology, and even ironically AI tools, which I used, I think, every day during session just to help supplement research. You always had to fact check it though, because it could
Yep.
lead you down the wrong path. But
We've been
but
there.
it was helpful for, if I wanted to just sort of do a dragnet and say, okay, I have this idea, such as the RoboCop bill, show me 5 states that have similar language and put it in a chart so I can kind of compare and contrast and so on and so forth. And so I think you kind of have to do that dragnet with any issue and see what's already out there, if there is anything. In that case, there wasn't much out there.
Right.
And just knowing how quickly these technologies are advancing, I decided to answer your question. In that case, that would be a proactive because nobody else is doing it, right?
Right.
But very often you can be reactive, and that's where you get a little bit of an advantage, like for example, I mean, I had a healthcare price transparency bill this session, and there are other states that have done that, and so we were able to kind of get the benefit of some of what's been done elsewhere, and be, maybe I wouldn't call it reactive, but at least having a better starting point. But I think often we are reactive, maybe
Yeah.
a little too often in a way, and I think that's usually when you have a problem that occurs. But it's not always bad. I mean, that's just the way our system works, and we meet only every 2 years. So sometimes we have to be a little reactive.
Exactly.
Um, but yeah, it's a little bit of both. You have to be able to pick and choose your priorities, and yeah,
Yeah.
that is one of the things that gets said a lot in session. Is one of the questions you have to answer anytime you put in a bill is, well, what problem is this trying to solve? If it seems
Well,
like it's proactive, and that's where it's a little bit of a tougher sell when it's proactive than
I
when
see.
it's reactive. But sometimes it's just as important.
We have a comment that we're going to get to in a minute, but right now, Kyler has some news for us.
I do. We have an update out of New York. It appears that Zoran Mamdani will be the next mayor of New York City at just 34. AP, Fox, CNN, Reuters, everyone's starting to call it. It looks like he's going to probably have at least about a good 150,000 plus vote gap between Andrew Cuomo, not Mario.
Yeah, and if you combine the votes that Sliwa got and Adams got, it still doesn't close that gap. Very incredible there. What does this mean for
Yeah.
America?
Yeah, and I'm looking off here. In case you're wanting to the side, I got my other window with
Oh,
the
you're
results
good.
up over. So,
Yeah.
I got 5
yeah,
in front of me.
yeah, and I'm not surprised. I was expecting that Mamdani would win, although I did see indications that the polls were narrowing and getting a lot closer. One thing, in fact, actually, that is true. It looks like from the numbers so far that Cuomo as a percentage did outperform a lot of the polling averages.
Right.
So,
As of right now, it
and I
looks
think,
like, I was just
oh,
going
go
to say,
ahead.
as of right now, it looks like it's probably going to be under a single digit victory, which for the most part of this fall, the polls all had Mamdani leading double digits.
Yeah, yep, for sure. So it definitely showed a few things. I think one of the things that we saw in the polling data is actually some of the older voters were some of the undecideds in higher proportion in the last few polls. And I would suspect, although I'm not totally sure, that a lot of those older voters leaned towards Cuomo and probably broke towards him ultimately on election day. Again, we'll see maybe from the exit polling if that's right, but that would be my guess. The other thing, though, is that turnout is high. And one of the other indicators that I knew that there was no chance almost of Cuomo somehow having a blowout. I mean, maybe there was a scenario where he could have narrowly won. Maybe you could argue that. But if you look at the highest percentage of people who had voted on any particular, or I'm sorry, of people who voted who had registered on any particular year were the people who registered this year.
Sure.
And the Mamdani campaign pushed heavily for voter registration of young people. And so there was going to be a massive new base of voters coming out in favor of him. So it will be very interesting to dive into the numbers here, especially geographically across the different boroughs to see, how was the vote in, say, Staten Island, or how was it in the Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn, or, to really dig into it. But Not surprising results, not at all.
Surface level, at least, looking at Staten Island, Cuomo won it by about 30%. He had 55% of the vote, over 73,000 votes. Next highest was Sliwa with, 29,000, and then Mamdani with almost 29,000. So those two are running neck and neck. Cuomo got that by a fair margin. Brooklyn and the Bronx, Mamdani won both of them handily by almost 20 points each, or I guess 20 in Brooklyn and about 10-12 in the Bronx, and then the Queens was pretty close, about 5-point gap between Mamdani and Cuomo so far.
Yeah. I mean, what does it mean for the country? I mean, it's so now's where I break away maybe from the more objective analysis and just tell you. I mean, I think it's definitely concerning to see someone who, embraces such obviously kind of naive and unrealistic economic views to now be in charge of the biggest city in the country. I do think that he will face significant difficulties in getting support behind some of those initiatives. But I also think that this is a moment for the Democratic Socialist wing of the party, and I think there will be a mandate, a sense of a mandate behind it. So I would not underestimate at the same time his ability to push some things through. I think in the short term, and this is typically how a lot of government type programs, it's kind of like, look at the COVID stimulus. Everybody got checks initially, and it was really great at first. You get a bunch of money, and I think a lot of these policies will be similar in that in the short term. I think actually a lot of them will be viewed very positively. And I think that there's a very high chance that he's actually seen very positively and that it'll be a big boon for the DSA type candidates heading into the midterm primaries for the Democrats. So it is a very significant victory for them. I think long term, though, I think it's not going to be sustainable. And I think it's going to really, what I don't know is exactly how divisive it's going to get into these primaries and how that could possibly weaken some candidates heading into very close races with the Republicans next fall. So that'll be very interesting to see how that happens. But there's no doubt this is, whether you like it or not, this is a huge win for the socialist wing of the Democrat Party, and it's going to have a significant impact nationally.
Without a doubt. And one thing I think it kind of shows too is just very broadly and very generally speaking, economics largely aside, the American people, and this has been something building for a decade now, are really starting to go towards the face of populism. However that face might be, right or left, it really feels like people want something more along those lines than your old school standard politician who's up there to hit the books and, make sure everything gets done, all cross all the T's, dot all the I's kind of thing. And now you're seeing people who really get the bases energized and moving, whether it be Trump on the right or Mamdani on the left. And it's a really interesting dynamic we're kind of starting to see play out here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of your quote unquote establishment, if you want to phrase it that way, on both sides, so to speak, are very dismissive of that. And that always kind of makes me chuckle a little bit to be dismissive of populism. I'm like, you do realize populism means it's popular.
Yeah.
But I think that's a very good point. If you look at the number one issue, again, this is from the polling in the New York mayor's race, the number one issue was the cost of living.
Yep.
Crime, which got a lot of attention, was the number two issue. Still big, huge issue. Everybody knows subways aren't safe anymore, and there's a lot of problems that it seems like we're at sort of pre-Giuliani levels of crime. But cost of living was the number one issue. And say what you will about Mamdani, I watched the debates. I thought, again, just objectively, I thought he did a really good job in the debates. That doesn't mean I agreed with what he said, but
He did well.
He was very polished. He was very effective. He was very laser focused on at least the sentiment that I think people in New York really feel. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, and even some of the peripheral discussions that got tied into it about, the Israel thing and anti-Semitism and all those things, those were ultimately, and I'm not trying to diminish it for somebody who might feel very strongly about that, but they're ultimately kind of sideshow issues. And I think that's what this result says. At the end of the day, people are concerned about their groceries and their rent, and they're willing to take a gamble on the guy that maybe is talking about some crazy stuff that I don't think is going to work, because they're desperate for something different because what is happening now is not working.
Have a comment that says asking if you would be able to pick a policy that is, I think you used the word naive earlier, but basically one of the policies that you were just addressing with cost of living and stuff like that, supplementing those things. What do you think is not going to work around those things?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I'm not an expert on how the Transit
Exactly.
Authority in New York
Right.
works,
That's what's
but
difficult about this conversation, to be clear.
yeah, but no, it's a fair question. I mean, I do know that, I mean, heck, even in Fargo, we subsidize our buses, and so, but they also are provided somewhat by bus fares, and so, I mean, having free buses, especially, or even like say, look at in New York, you have your subway, obviously, and actually Sliwa made this an issue in the debate where he said that there's a lot of people that slip through without even paying their fare. We're talking
Sure.
about free fare, yet we're not even collecting what we need. So I think that's a very poor way to sustain a transportation system.
Right.
I think that's unrealistic. I also think if you look at national or not nationalizing, but creating grocery stores run by the government. I mean, grocery stores operate in very slim margins. You have to be a pretty robust business person to keep a grocery store going. And the government doesn't have a very good track record of watching nickels and dimes. And I think operating a business on that kind of a narrow margin. So those are just a couple of examples.
Yeah.
But I also think that and there's some, and I don't have them right here handy in front of me, but I do know there is some research on some of the programs that they've talked about where, or that Ma'am Danny's talked about, where they're using alternative police responses to potentially domestic crime situations, whatever, or the intention that he's saying is, well, these are issues that have an overwhelming drug addiction or mental health issue, and we need a different approach. But there is some evidence that shows that that approach is not very effective. So, I mean, those are just a few things, but time will tell. We'll see
Right.
how it goes. But I think that we also have many decades of evidence that a lot of socialized programs don't typically work very well. I mean, you have sometimes you could argue maybe that it works regionally, if you have something that is, I mean, look at the state mill in North Dakota. It's been pretty
Yeah.
effective, very well run, kind of unique circumstances there. But in general, these types of institutions are not run very efficiently, and they tend to de-incentivize productivity and the other things that are necessary for the taxpayers to provide the resources to fund all these things. So it's just not a good long-term plan.
Yeah. Do you, we're seeing a bunch of blue. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I just got one quick update. It appears Fox has called the Virginia Attorney General race for Jay Jones. The AP has yet to officially do so, but it looks like it's probably going to be breaking for Jay Jones in Virginia.
Still breaks into the next question I was going to ask. Basically, everything that we followed today goes blue. Now, a lot of that was expected because they were, New Jersey, New York. It was definitely going to be, well, New Jersey, not necessarily, but New York was definitely going to be blue or independent, which was Cuomo, which was still blue.
Blue or blue.
Yeah. New Jersey, it was going to be a uphill battle for the Republican candidate. Virginia was something that people thought had a chance for the Republican to win. And in either the AG's race or the governor race. Is this a trend that is beginning right here? Or is this, again, you kind of alluded earlier, not sure how much we should look into this election more than just beyond the people that are getting elected today. Should we just stay calm and carry on till midterms if you're concerned about Republicans losing any advantages that they had? Or is this a trend that might pick up steam going into midterms?
Well, I don't think you should ever stay calm because politics, nothing moves in politics unless it's pushed. And so I think that if you are alarmed by the results, or I guess if you're happy by them, either way, if you want to see more or less of the results, you have to take action. I think Republicans better take it very seriously. Now, I do put the caveat on there that, again, this is essentially Virginia, essentially is a blue state. New Jersey
Right.
essentially is a blue state. I
Yeah.
mean, if anything, we could argue a little purple. So the fact that these elections were, at least with the AG's race, as close as it was, I think, it is actually arguably a pretty good sign for Republicans, you could argue. So yeah, I wouldn't draw extremely broad conclusions from it. We'll have to see how things shape up heading into the primaries next year. But I will say in general that the party in the White House very often doesn't do well in midterms. And I
Right.
think that Republicans really need to get it together. And I'll say just objectively, I say this even though I am a Republican, I think that Republicans are generally not as good at wielding power as Democrats are. I mean, Democrat leadership is, and I'm not saying this just to be partisan. I mean, I honestly think this is objectively true that Democrats are just ruthless. I mean, when they're in power, they know how to unify, they know how to fall in line. There's good things, there's bad things about that. Whereas Republicans tend to kind of fight amongst each other a
Right.
lot more. And so I think I'm not saying to not fight for what you believe in. I'm just saying to consider the bigger picture
Sure.
heading into the midterms. I think if you're a Republican, you need to be thinking about that.
For sure. One commenter, Dan, says it doesn't change much from what it has been. Definitely would be interesting. Now we will talk about, how the Republican Party works, and especially in the state of North Dakota, how it works, because it does definitely has a unique approach in North Dakota with the comments. Going back to an early conversation, though, we didn't get to this comment because races started getting called. Aaron said there's still an argument. This is referring to property tax. There's still an argument that this 3% cap in the property taxes may force cuts to essential public services, as it does not adequately account for inflation, the likelihood of population growth, and the overall rising operational costs. And he's specifically talking about within the Fargo areas. That's where your boots on the ground. You might have a closer view of those budgets that have been coming out in the Fargo area. Do you where do you stand on this idea that maybe this 3% isn't going to be able to consistently cover the operational costs? I know that runs back to an early conversation for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and I thankfully, I say thankfully because I don't need any more jobs on my plate, but I thankfully don't follow local government that much, but I probably should follow it more. But I know that, over the years, we've spent quite a lot of money on different things. I mean, the city of Fargo, last time I checked, has like, I don't know, about half a dozen city-owned golf courses. And I went to one of
That's
them
an all
one
right
time,
thing.
and
Wow.
a bunch of golf carts sitting around not being used. And you kind of wonder about something that's running at hundreds of thousands of dollars of a deficit every year. But anyway, point being, there are things like that. But I do think that to the point of the person commenting, I think, yes, that is probably going to be the case. Again, because certain areas are growing more significantly than others. Certain areas have needs that are maybe not being met. And that's really the great challenge in government, is figuring out where those priorities are. Kind of might seem like a bit of a stretch, but it's kind of related in a way logically. But one of the things you hear a lot about is across the board cuts, right? Like we just need to cut everything 1% or 3% or whatever across the board. And that's a nice theory, but really the way we should be approaching government, I think, is being more surgical, where, there might be some things, believe it or not, where maybe we do need to spend more money. And then there's some things that the government does, state government, local government, and especially federal government, that they shouldn't be doing at all. So
Right.
the whole idea of sort of even across the board approaches, to me, is not always good. Interestingly, though, we did have a bill this session which I did vote for, and it was sort of a some extent of response to the 3% cap of the locals, but it was a 3%. I think it was three or four.
Mhm.
Don't quote me on that percent cap on the state budget, and that was actually introduced by
Right.
another Minot representative,
Yes.
Tina Wolf, and I
Yep.
did vote for that, and I thought it was really only fair that maybe if we're going to limit locals, we should limit ourselves. But again, you can make the argument that it's a bad policy at the local and state level, but the argument in favor was, well, let's at least try to be consistent.
I think that's a necessary thing.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that we've seen as one of the bigger fallouts from that last session here. And I at last night's city council meeting, Representative Christina Wolf and State Senator Jose Castaneda were both there. And one bill that they were discussing was House Bill 1298, which was the bill that lowered the speed, changed the speed limits throughout the state and changed the criminal traffic enforcements on some things. So, local municipalities aren't able to freely double the rates on certain speeding tickets and fines of that nature. Is that a fair brief rundown of it?
Yeah.
So
how do you keep track of all the bills in your head?
Yeah, I know.
Well, that's why when you started to say the number, I was trying to remember what it was while you're saying it. But yeah, it's 1,000 bills sometimes. Like take the property tax bills, for example. Somebody might start talking to me about, a particular one. And I'm like, we had like 7 of them.
Which one?
I'm trying, be specific.
They say that, we're a red state, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they say that Republicans are small government. Is 1,000 bills still small government?
Well, it's all relative. I know in past years it's been lower, and I think it's even been higher. I don't know what the record is historically. But, I think it's funny you say that, because I had somebody say to me, more than one person actually say that we should cap the number of bills that the legislator should be able to put in. And I actually don't agree with that, just
Right.
because, I mean, maybe if the limit was very high, like 30 or something like that, maybe. But the reason I don't agree with it is because if I'm willing to work harder and put in a lot of good bills, and by the way, a lot of those bills might be eliminating wasteful government. It doesn't,
Sure.
just because it's a bill doesn't mean it's adding something. Then why should I be punished if I'm willing to work harder? But I do think there is some low-hanging fruit that we can address. For example, we have a significant portion of our bills that come in that are agency bills. And these are bills coming from the state agencies. They're not introduced by a state representative. In fact, they, in many cases, there was one, I remember the first day we were in transportation committee. It was, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was actually having to do with advertisements on state highway signs.
Sure.
And it was something the Department of Transportation put in. We spent hours on this in committee, and then we ended up voting it down and went to the floor, got killed. I mean, it's like, why are we wasting time and money on a bill that never had a legislative sponsor, never would have been introduced by a legislator, most likely? And so, that's some low-hanging fruit. I don't know what number of bills that would be exactly, but it would be at least a few percentage points of bills that we get. Every bill should have a legislative sponsor, should have an individual person who decided to take the lead on it and be accountable to it. And that's actually to the benefit of the agencies too, because if they find a sponsor, that sponsor is going to be much more invested in the success of that bill, and they're going to be much more incentivized to learn and advocate for it. Whereas the way we do things now is kind of silly. And we're the only state in the country that allows executive agencies to directly introduce bills, by the way. And it's allowed in our rules.
And one argument also that can be made to talk about alleviating the number of bills you see every session is to do something, or is to change something that we also do as the only state in the nation, and that's the biennium that we operate under with our state legislature, and to change it into a every yearly situation. Do you still favor the biennium and having the citizen legislature, or would you rather see it maybe transition into a more of a yearly cycle?
Yeah, I did vote for the annual session bill.
Okay.
I'm not the biggest advocate of it in this. It's not a priority, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I thought it was a reasonable argument, especially in the era of term limits with the turnover. There's an argument that you'll get a little more experience, because that is one of the big discussions around term limits, is you're balancing those two things of getting rid of some of the negative aspects of entrenched legislators, but also, the trade-off is you do lose some experience. You got to balance those two things. So I think getting that experience in annual sessions could be good. I think it's better and more efficient for budget forecasting. And so there's a good argument for it. I also am open, frankly, to, and I'm not saying I'm just spitballing here, I'm not saying this is the solution, but even maybe looking into doing things more like the National Guard. I mean, it's not 1890 anymore. We're not riding in a horse carriage to Bismarck and staying there for a few months camping out in the winter. I mean, maybe we should look at going into session maybe a couple of days a month and one weekend a month or something like that. And there's a lot of pros and cons in that. Again, I haven't thought it through. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm
Right.
just saying we need to start having those discussions, because we need it to be, as long as it's accessible to citizens, and we maintain that. But then we also need to make sure that we have a legislature that's more reflective of the people. That was one of the things that I noticed. Not that I didn't know already, but it's a lot more noticeable when you get elected and you're sitting in there. But a lot of the people in the chamber, not saying they're bad people, but it skews in favor of older and retired and maybe more independently wealthy, because they're the ones that are able to leave for 4 months and not have to
Yep.
have a job in normal circumstances. So I think anything we can do to move more towards making it easier for regular working class people so that the legislature is more proportionally reflective of the electorate, I think that's good.
No, I think that's a great point. It's almost impossible for most of the working class to go and be able to be there for 4 months out of the year. It's just extremely difficult for that to happen. Having some kind of adjustment. And the second thing is, you get the question we asked earlier is, should you be reactive or proactive when you know you're not going to meet for 2 years? At the way that life moves now, that is forever. Like, Microsoft could go bankrupt before you have session again, because that's how fast life moves now. And you're going to be like changing. That's an extreme example, but the point is real, where you're having some massive changes that would affect the entire state, and you're going to be called in just for a special session just for that one thing. If there was a more consistent environment, you'd be able to anticipate some of these things where they're coming down the line, be reactive in a proactive sense, and that maybe it doesn't fully affect because it hasn't actually had the incident, but you can see it, rather than having, oh yeah, it's going to be a year and a half before we can address that.
Well, you look back 120, what was the North Dakota's birthday, 136 or whatever it was this year, back to the original times when the state was founded. 50, 60% of the populace that was in the state legislature at that time was probably a farmer of some sort. That's why that biennium was set for that early time of year, so they could go down to Bismarck, get all the jobs accomplished, and get back home before it was time to plant the seed. Yeah. And
It's true.
It's changed a little bit since then, I think.
At the state level, most of the races that we are tracking have shut down. We still have one that we're loosely following. That is the one in our neighbor.
Oh, we're going to talk. Okay, go.
Minneapolis.
Time to talk about this.
Yeah, Minneapolis.
The Minneapolis
mayoral
mayor race.
race.
And also they have 2 special elections in their state Senate as well, in districts 47 and 29.
That is tragic, actually.
Yeah, unfortunate situation. Frankly, both of them, one a lot more so, but not great situations with either of those, why those have become open seats. Both of them, I think, largely skew in one party or the other, but there's always a chance in a situation like today that you could see it become a tight race. But that District 47 looks like it's pretty consistently a Democratic district, while that District 29, flip side, is historically a pretty safe GOP seat.
Very good.
The really interesting one in Minnesota is that mayor race.
Yeah.
Is that one going
yeah.
blue?
Yeah. And
Technically,
that
I
is
think
another-
it's nonpartisan, but
Yeah. Well, and that's another one that is, the dynamic is, there's some parallels to the dynamic of the New York mayor's race there, because you have the incumbent mayor, Jacob Frey, is more or less the establishment, if you want to call him that, a candidate. He's sort of the Cuomo, right? Who might be a more standard type Democrat, maybe not a JFK type Democrat, but by today's standards, a standard Democrat. And then you have Omar Fateh, who is the Democrat socialist candidate. So my prediction is that Frey will win, but I do think that it'll be close. I think it could be very close, but it's a very similar dynamic. And The demographics are also at play in Minneapolis for obvious reasons. You have a Somali candidate, you have a very large Somali community. And I would say, that's a lot more clear than New York, where you have a much larger and more diverse group of communities. And you don't necessarily have any one community, I think, is maybe that, I would say, almost proportionally influential. So,
For sure.
yeah, that'll be a very interesting one to watch.
And one other interesting thing about that race, too, is it's actually a ranked choice vote. In New York, they dealt with ranked choice voting in the primaries, but in the general here, it's all plurality. So highest percentage wins. However, in Minneapolis, that is a ranked choice vote for that. And you see there's like 14 people on their ballot right now. And so I think it's top 4, top 5, you rank the order of the ballot of who you would have your preferences for. And one big caveat with this race, it's going to take quite a while for the results to finally come in. The polls have been closed for over an hour now, and it's sitting with about 7% of votes counted. And as of right now, Jacob Frey is winning by about 1,000 votes over Fateh.
We'll have the final update on that one on Thursday.
Likely so. Yep.
You'll have it before everyone else watching will have it before we do, but definitely an interesting race to watch there.
Couple other ones that are kind of going on throughout the country. There's some interesting stuff in Pennsylvania about some of their state Supreme Court seats that are held by different Democrats throughout. It looks like they're all going to retain their seats. Most mayorships around the country, the incumbents, it looks like, that have been running have won re-election. Jersey City is going... Oh, that's all nonpartisan. Excuse me. I thought that one wasn't.
So going back to the state that we live in, North Dakota,
home.
Recently, there was a change out in the Republican Party on the chair of the party. And now it is Matthew Simon. We've had him on recently. You can, to the viewer, they can go back and watch that interview if they want to get to know him more. But obviously, big tent philosophy has expanded the Republican Party over the last bit. Now there is some perceived division within the party. Curious your feelings. You're working in the party. You're just trying to get stuff done. Is there division in the party that is to the point where we should be concerned about, or that the state Republicans should be concerned about? And what do you feel about the future of the Republican Party in North Dakota as new direction is being set?
So I always say the same kind of response to that. Is that the antidote to division is leadership. And I think whenever you see divisiveness within a political system or political party, if you want to neutralize that in favor of an agenda or a vision that you think is good, then you have to be able to organize and coalesce support behind that vision and actually do the work to get it done. So I think that the reason, if you will, that I think there's been that kind of division is that we haven't had a lot of strong leadership within the party. And I think that you have to separate that. For the average voter, they aren't thinking about it in terms of the internal structure of the party. They're thinking about that in terms of, well, I show up and I vote for John Hoeven or Doug Burgum or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the intra-party elections and the intra-party leadership. And I think that has really been significant in the last few years. We've seen huge increase in participation. And I think that that's largely because whether someone agrees or not, there is a perception that is very real that leadership is out of touch with where most grassroots voters are. Now, one of the narratives that's thrown out there is that, well, the individuals that are showing up and getting involved in the party at the grassroots level are sort of disproportionately influential, disproportionately impactful, and not truly representative of your average Republican voter, right? Like these are conservatives, crazy, far-right people, whatever. That's one of the narratives. Yeah. Now, it is true that people who get organized and show up at conventions do have a disproportionate influence. And if you're really good at organizing, getting people, you get 50 people to a meeting to decide who your local legislator is, then obviously those 50 people have a lot of influence over the 16,500 people that live in that district. That is true. But what is interesting, though, about, and why I think that narrative is very oversimplified and maybe even false, is that if you actually look at the election results, in almost every case where you have incumbents running, and even where they've won, and people look at that and say, well, look, the incumbents won, the people that show up at the party endorsed these other conservative candidates that lost. Well, the thing is, the incumbents all ran as conservatives. So, I mean, if the message of the conservative issues is not popular, not the correct one, and not in line with where most Republican voters are, why are they running as conservatives and
Right.
winning?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, they have along with that all the advantages of name ID and money and all those other things. So you can't really simplify it down to one factor. And I kind of, to make it maybe the point a little more directly, look at somebody like Donald Trump. Donald Trump got, I think, what, 63% of the vote in North Dakota, something like that. It might
Give
be
or
a
take a
little
couple
higher
points
actually.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you actually poll Trump's position on, say, immigration, it probably has 85% support.
Hmm.
So I would actually say a
I
lot
see.
of the quote unquote Republican platform issues are probably even more popular than the party itself. And so I think there is, because of that perceived disconnect between leadership and those issues that voters care about, there has been a lot of turnover and a lot of activity in the party. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think that the impetus is on the current leadership to galvanize that grassroots passion and energy into productive success for the party. And I think that's
Right.
definitely possible because I think that is where most voters are.
Yeah. Go get back to the graduate. 67% is what Trump got in 2024. Um, so
I think it was
uh,
63 in 2020, but I could be wrong.
you're probably right. Um, Grassroots. One of the things that some people felt a couple years ago was that the Republican Party putting the convention in Fargo was a slap in the face to grassroots. That was some of the messaging that got back because obviously that was a lot of real estate for everybody in North Dakota to have to drive, unless if you lived in Fargo. Where's it going to happen this year? We're just trying to find out, man. We just want to know where it's going to happen in 2026.
Yeah,
Has has it been
it's
released
gonna
yet?
be in Minot, as far as I know. So I'm no longer a district chair, and I'm a little detached from some of what's going on in the party actually. But yeah, my understanding, I don't have the exact dates, but I think it's going to be towards the end of March in Minot,
I like
which
it.
would be the first time since I believe 2014, if I'm not mistaken, that it's been in Minot.
I like it a lot. We're going to
I
have a
guess we're
good
gonna
time with
have to
that.
take some time off in the end of March now.
Well, when you're up in Minot in March next year, we'll have to do this live with you in
Sure.
studio. That'll
Yeah.
be a
Be
that'll
fun.
be a blast. I want to talk about something though on the federal level that is just now seeping down into local levels. It starts out as they're playing games. There's a government shutdown, and then it goes for 35 days, and benefits start getting lost, and everyone's life starts getting impacted. And like, all right, let's go get this figured out now. Um, what's been your viewpoint of this government shutdown? Obviously, there's back and forth on is it actually a clean CR continuing resolution? What's the true dynamics of what's going on here? What's your actual viewpoint though of what's going on here? Can this actually get resolved? Were we just waiting for election day? I know you don't have all the inside secrets, but I'd love to hear your viewpoint.
Yeah. Well, I think it's all very disappointing and very frustrating, and there are some real, negative aspects to it that are affecting a lot of people in North Dakota, a lot of our farmers, and not just our government workers. I know that's something a lot of conservatives point out, but it affects a lot of people. Um, Now, on the other hand, do I believe that the federal government wastes a significant amount of money, and would I like to see a lot of programs cut? Yes, I would. But I think we should do that with vision and purpose and a little bit of constitutionalism and not through this kind of chaos. And so that is very disappointing to see. And I think, frankly, you can blame a little bit of both parties to this. I think that there's a lack of prioritization on what our constitutional obligations are. I mean, look, these are the same people that have spent hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into Ukraine, while we struggle to, pay for our health care and pay for our veterans and things like that in the United States, and where apparently we need, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars more for border security. And I'm not saying that we don't. I'm just saying that, our priorities get very screwed up sometimes. So now, all that being said, one of the things, in fact, I actually just posted something on Facebook tonight about this. But one of the things that's being said out there that I do think is very one-sided is this whole idea that Democrats are, well, at least the narrative is that Democrats are doing this because they're trying to protect medical benefits for illegal immigrants, right? That's kind of the Republican talking point, and the
Sure.
Democrat talking point is that that is false because they don't receive these benefits. And I think that that's the Democrats are really the Democrat leaders, I should say. At least I'm not going to say all Democrat voters, because I think actually most Democrat voters are not in favor of giving medical benefits to illegal immigrants.
Right.
But I think that that's very dishonest what they're saying, because they're using the word games, if you will, to defend their position, because they defined certain unauthorized or undocumented immigrants with certain statuses like the DACA individuals or parolees or whatever status, because they don't consider them to be illegal. They're using that to say, well, we don't want to extend medical benefits for illegals. Well, that's just because of how you define the term. But if you go through the Department of Homeland Security and all other reputable immigration policy institutions that I'm aware of, those terms have always been pretty much synonymous, unauthorized, undocumented, and illegal. And before the big, beautiful bill passed, those groups were eligible to receive certain benefits. And so they want to return to that designation. So I think it's just really dishonest for them to say that, well, this is not about some of those benefits for illegal immigrants. Now they'll say that, well, they're not getting them directly. But think about it. If you have money going into all these different programs, especially in healthcare where all funds are fungible, and you have these large provider networks, and we have very little transparency about how the money moves through. That was something we dealt with this session with the 340B program transparency. That's a whole other topic. But the point is, we don't have a lot of transparency on that. And so we know if there's federal money coming in for one purpose, that they're going to adjust, and it's going to have an impact. If it's burdening the healthcare system in one area, they're going to adjust, and they're going to need more money from the federal government in another area. So even if the impact is indirect, it will still have an impact.
Yeah.
And one thing, too, I got to say on kind of a similar note to that, we, as North Dakotans in general, and I know myself and I think Jonathan to a degree, have definitely, showed our gripes about the state level tax burden, for lack of a better term. I think the one that people need to be more concerned about is that federal income tax. I think that's the one that hits our pockets harder. Obviously, the property tax, getting hit with that once a year, that one lump sum always sucks. But I really think that federal income tax is one of those things that people should be a little bit more up in arms about if they're going to be upset about being taxed too much.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good argument with that, because you could say, well, at least if we're funding things here in the state, even property taxes, again, notwithstanding the problems with property taxes,
Yeah.
but at least theoretically you're funding things that you need in your local community, right? Whereas with federal income taxes, what are we really funding? Take, for example, the Department of Education. On what planet does it make sense logically that we send our tax dollars to Washington, D.C., pay bureaucrats six-figure salaries who then divide it up and send less of it back to us? With strings attached. It makes no sense. Certain things, yes, we want the federal government to fund our military and our federal court systems and these things that are necessary to do at the federal level. But a lot of these other things could and should be done much more efficiently at the state level, if they should be done at all in some cases. And healthcare is another good example of that. Healthcare regulation, really, ideally, most of it should be done at the state level. But unfortunately, because of the vast expansion of the overutilization of insurance, which has been top-down federal policy for the most part, as well as Medicare and Medicaid and all these big federal programs, because the federal government has its hands in all that, then the federal government now has its hands in regulating everything about healthcare. And there's a lot of problems with that. Whereas I think if we had more of a state by state model, you'd have basically 50 different states with innovative ideas to maybe figure out what is the best way to deliver healthcare. And we can still get some of that. I think we can push more towards that. And I definitely want to push more towards state level market reforms. But I'm just making the point that that system has become so big and onerous and behemoth that it's almost impossible to fix. I'm not going to say impossible, but almost impossible.
It feels like one of those monumental tasks that it's unfathomable almost how you can get over that hump, but it really feels like it's a hump that needs to be tackled at this point.
Probably chipping away at the brick wall for a while on it, though. Well, the last race outstanding is the one in Minneapolis. We're not going to be able to find out the results on that tonight. It's been fantastic conversation with you, Representative Hendrix. Really enjoy having you on. We need to have you on more. That's what we say every single time you come on. Never happens. Any comments about that? Just kidding. But
happy to do it again.
I know you are. You're always fantastic. It's us. We need to make more time for it. Igor says great points by Mr. Jared Hendrix. So those in the comments love it as well. We'll look forward to March when we'll actually be able to get you by the hand and say, hey, you're coming on when the convention is in my that's going to be a blast.
They're in our backyard now.
Yeah. We'll see how that goes.
It'll be fantastic. I look forward to it.
Yep.
Well, Minot is my old stomping ground.
It is.
Magic City, baby.
You know all the what's your favorite place to eat around here?
Oh boy. Well, I always was partial to Me Mexico and Ebenezer's downtown.
Love Me Mexico and Abs. Gosh, both of those are two
solid
great
choices,
picks.
man. So and Abs is close to the. I imagine I have no idea where this convention is going to be held at, but it's probably going to be at the fairgrounds, right? Either that or the auditorium. Could be the auditorium.
I believe so, but I don't know the answer to that, so don't quote me on that.
So Abs will be close to that. Hopefully they have the construction done, so it's
fingers crossed. You can take the back way.
Which by the way, a lot of people who, I mean, of course, if you're Minot listening right now, you know this, but if you're not in Minot and you're traveling through sometime, Ebenezer's is known, of course, as a pub, but they actually have very good breakfast.
Oh,
yeah, they do.
Get the haystacker.
I actually don't eat their breakfast, so I can't say that. They have a very good fat frog.
Oh God, I love the fat frog.
It tastes better than it sounds.
It's a holy mess, and it's a unit of a sandwich, but man, it is good.
Has nothing
It's
to
not
do.
actually a frog.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
yeah,
I was just gonna say that.
Pointing out.
Right, yeah. And their ebb sauce is money. Their Irish fries are good too. Going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. We're getting in the comments from Mr. Brad Wolf. That is going to be at the North Dakota State Fairgrounds March 27th, 28th, and 29th. So we will look forward to that in March.
It's going to be great. I can't wait.
Yeah. Again, Representative Hendrix, thank you so much for coming on today.
Of course, yeah. Glad to do it.
Absolutely. All right. And with that, we will say good night to you all. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you this Thursday, 9 a.m.
Thanks so much.